Welcome everybody. We'll just give a few moments for everybody to finish joining. Okay, so let's get started. For those who don't know me, I'm Laura Skillen, the Executive Director of International Mediation Institute, and I'm very glad that we have Blazo here with us today. I'll introduce him shortly. But firstly, a little housekeeping. For those who haven't used Zoom webinar before, you'll see that there's a big Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or on your phone. If you do have questions as Blazo is speaking, please submit them via the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. I can see someone's hand is up. I will, Mohan, if you just want to put something in chat. Great, okay. So with no further ado, I'll introduce Blazo. Now Blazo is an IMI Certified Mediator. He is a former JAMS Weinstein International Fellow and is also a thought leader in mediation in Serbia. And I could not be more delighted to have him here with us today, talking about the role of mediation, apology and mediation rather. Blazo.
Thank you very much, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to present this webinar. It's actually my first webinar, so I beg your patience and understanding, especially if we have some technical problems. But we all obviously have to get used to these new circumstances and this is going to become normal feature in our lives. First of all, let me thank Laura and International Mediation Institute for creating this opportunity. I would also like to thank Professor Peter Robinson from the Pepperdine Law School, Strauss Institute, for allowing me to use his materials and basically knowledge that he shared. He's the one who developed this course. He actually retired after 30 years of teaching. He retired last week, so if anybody from Strauss is looking, although it's very early on the West Coast, please say hi to Professor Robinson. So I'd also like to thank some people from my team who helped me put together a presentation. You will see it in a minute. Why I've decided to present this topic. Since my LLM at Pepperdine in 2017 and 18, I realized how important this topic is. The topic of apology is a part of our everyday life, but it's also part of our business life. And especially us as dispute resolution professionals, judges, lawyers, mediators, we use apology and we come across apology every day. So with that, I would like each and every one of you just to think about, in the last 2 weeks, how many cases did you have, instances where you were in a situation to apologize to somebody or somebody apologized to you? So just pick one from each group and keep it in the back of your mind. And as we go along with this webinar, I think that you will be able to put some of these rules and principles into the actual situations that you encounter every day. Now, most of the materials that I am going to use and refer to today and principles are from the US, from the American practice and application of apology, if that's the way to say. Professor Peter Robinson, I mentioned. Another one very important scholar is Dr. Aaron Lazar. He's a former dean of the Massachusetts Medical School. He's no longer alive. And he wrote an amazing book called On Apology. The third one I'd like to refer to is Mr. Lee Taft. Lee Taft is an attorney and he's apology consultant. And he wrote several very, very useful articles. In the materials that Laura is going to share with you at the end of the webinar, I included my modified course paper on apology that I wrote for Pepperdine. And the paper contains all these names and lots of citations and references that you might find useful. So I'm now going to switch to my PowerPoint presentation just as an illustration. And if I understand properly, I'm going to be shown in the background. So let me see. I have to choose and I have to share with you. Okay, there we go. This is the presentation, although it's not at the beginning. So I hope you can all see this. This is the starting slide. And as you could see in the invitation, we are going to talk about the power of apology in dispute resolution, meanings, types, and motivations for apology. Third part is probably the most important, how to deliver effective apology. And then we're going to move to discussing what professionals, legal professionals, and other professionals who are in a situation to advise on apology, what are some rules for them, and then finally mediators facilitating apology. This is based on a full day course that we deliver on apology. So given the time constraints of the webinar of some 35 to 40 minutes to allow for questions at the end, I may have to just touch upon some of the issues. But my goal here is my expectation here is to get you interested in this topic and think about the apology for you in all those three situations: in your everyday life, personally, with families, with friends, in your business life as managers of companies, directors, supervisors, but also as dispute resolution professionals, lawyers, mediators, and others. So why is apology so important? What is the power of apology? As you can see from this slide, the ultimate goal is reconciliation. But the apology is actually a crucial first step, because it is very unlikely that without sincere, proper, complete, timely apology that is capable of facilitating actually forgiveness, it's difficult to imagine that there may be a reconciliation. So if we think on a larger scale about wider conflicts that go on and on and on, and we ask ourselves why there is no closure, why there is no reconciliation, maybe because the first step is missing. Now, what's important here to note is that the only one who can give apology is the offender. No one else. Only the offender can apologize. But then the only one who can forgive is the victim. So if we have effective apology and acceptance of that apology in the form of forgiveness, we may hope to have a reconciliation. Just about a word about terminology. I will probably use the expression effective apology. It can sound a little technical, dry, but when I say effective apology, I mean the apology that is capable of facilitating, of motivating forgiveness, and ultimately leading us to to reconciliation. So when I say effective apology, I mean apology that is sincere, that is complete, timely. Okay? Now we come to the meaning of the apology. I hope that all of you have remembered one or two instances where you had to apologize to somebody or somebody was apologizing to you. So essentially there are two main variables in defining the meaning of an apology. And now I'm going to show you a little chart with some bubbles. The vertical one is the realization that my behavior injured or hurt someone. So what I did, what I said, what I didn't do created harm to someone. Moral, ethical, emotional, physical, financial, etc., etc. The second variable, the horizontal line, is if I believe that my behavior was wrong. Okay? So if both of these two conditions are met, we're talking about a remorse apology. Okay? So what I did hurt you, and I was wrong in doing it. I'm accepting the responsibility. I'm admitting that. A simple example can be I was driving my car and I was texting. And I didn't brake in time, so I rear-ended the car in front of me that was waiting at the traffic light. So I come out and I say, I admit, I said, I'm sorry, I was texting. It's entirely my fault. Let me see what I can. Are you okay? Let me see if I can repair your damage. Okay, and I'm so upset. I'll make sure this never happens again. So for many people, this remorse apology is the only real and proper apology. However, if I believe that my behavior injured someone else, but the guilt is absent, I don't think that what I did was wrong. We can talk about the regret apology. An example of that would be you have a burst pipe in the streets, and the repairmen come and they close the entire street. So people who live in that street cannot get to their drive-ins and houses and garages, but have to leave the car at the beginning or end of the street while the repairs are going on. So the repairmen in this case, they were not doing anything wrong. And if the same situation would happen again, they would do again the same thing. In the American practice, this can be illustrated by an example of a police officer justifiably shooting, injuring, or killing a citizen in self-defense, etc. So the regret apology allows the expression of sympathy, expression of regret, but without accepting guilt for what has happened. Okay. If neither of these two elements are present, so I had nothing to do with the injury. We're talking about empathy apology. Empathy is simplest example is expressing condolences or sympathy for somebody's death, or saying, I'm sorry you lost your job. So I had nothing to do with it. I didn't injure you. Of course, I did nothing wrong, but it allows me to express compassion. So then we're talking about the empathy apology. What is harmless error? Harmless error is a situation where the apologizer believes that they did something wrong, but there is no injury. So the victim, the perceived victim, said, no, you didn't do anything wrong. An example is international student challenging aggressively professor in class about some concepts, some ideas. At the end of the class, the student would approach the professor and say, I apologize for asking you too many questions. But the professor would say, no, you had every right to do that, and you created a good atmosphere, etc., etc. So that's why we're talking about the harmless error. In error, I thought I created an injury, but there was no harm done, actually. So it's harmless error. Another type of apology is so-called social harmony apology. You will see that this is close to the empathy apology. The social harmony is the situation where we do not apologize because we believe we did anything wrong or even injured somebody, but to keep social peace. Let's say an example could be a large family dinner, and somebody cracks a joke about fat people or politics, and Uncle Howard or Aunt Jeannie, they get offended. So the apologizer doesn't feel they said anything wrong. Actually, they feel that Uncle Howard and Aunt Jeannie are exaggerating, they're too sensitive. We always joke in this way, etc., etc. But in order to, they're still offended. So in order to keep social peace, I will apologize. Although I do not believe that I did anything wrong or that my actions actually were capable of creating some injury. So all of these meanings or of types of apology are internally motivated, and we will see in a minute what can be internal motivations for the apology. Compared to that, we have externally motivated apology. So internal motivations for an apology are important because motivations are important because sometimes when we hear an apology, we may feel, is this sincere? Do they really mean what they are saying? Okay. There are two main internal motivations for apology: guilt and empathy. So if we would go back to the previous slide, guilt is present with the remorse apology. I feel guilty. I feel that what I did was wrong. And that's why it's the guilt that actually motivating me to apologize. Okay? An apology is a very powerful tool to relieve guilt. If I admit my wrongdoing, I will actually clear my conscience in a way and be calm, be assured that I've done everything I could, even if my counterpart would not accept my apology. Okay, but in regret apology, social harmony and empathy, obviously, as we saw a minute ago, there is no guilt element. So the motivation for giving apology is actually sympathy or empathy with another person. So we need to distinguish those internally motivated apologies from externally motivated apologies. The purpose of giving internally motivated apology is to restore the victim, to attend to victim's needs. Contrary to that, externally motivated apology is motivated by the wish to avoid external sanctions or minimize consequences. So I wouldn't apologize otherwise if I was not faced with possible sanctions or punishment. Good example of that is a parent telling a child, a brother or a sister, you must apologize to your brother or to your sister because you did this and that, otherwise you'll go to bed at 7 p.m., for example. So they don't feel any guilt. They don't sympathize. They don't even feel that they did anything wrong, but they will apologize to avoid a sanction. Very clear example of minimizing consequences is that in a criminal case, the offender apologizes, hoping to receive a reduced sentence. So the purpose of external apology is not to restore the victim, but self-preservation of the offender. Offender apologizes in order to improve his or her chances at the end of the process. So it's the well-being of the apologizer. And as dispute resolution professionals, we should be aware of these different types of the motivation. Okay. Psychological needs of the victim. This can be very important, because do we really think about this when we are apologizing? Understanding what are the psychological needs of the victim, what may be psychological needs of the victim, can help us to properly craft or phrase and deliver an apology. So if we know what are the elements of good apology that I will come to in a minute, and we know what what the victim may potentially wish to hear from us, it may assist us in delivering and creating an effective, as I said at the beginning, apology. So the first one is restoration of dignity. Every offense is mostly very disrespectful and humiliating for the victim. The offense signals that the offender is more dominant, is more important than the victim, is much higher than the victim. Okay. For example, we constantly arrive late to some appointments. We often speak rudely or offensively to the victim, etc., etc. We show disrespect. So that kind of behavior signals that we are okay, that we are higher than the victim. When we apologize, we signal to the victim that we realize that our behavior was inappropriate. Now, here I'm talking about the sincere apology, of course. Our behavior was inappropriate. And in a way, we empower the victim, okay? So every apology that contains the element of guilt is in a way self-humiliating. So I'm humbling myself before the victim by admitting my wrongdoing and offering to repair the injury. There is an interesting illustration of this phenomenon, and I hope you will be able to see it. So green person is the victim and the red person is the offender. So they are initially on the same ground floor level. Okay. So after the offense, the victim goes down to the basement and the offender elevates to the first floor. Okay. Now, when the offender decides to apologize, look what happens. Please note that the victim is now higher than the offender, because now victim has a power. So by apologizing, the offender has given the power to the victim. So not only that the offender has apologized and self-humiliated themselves, but they've given the power to the victim to decide whether they will accept this apology or not. Okay. Once the victim accepts the apology, they go back to the ground floor level. Assurance of shared values. if when I choose to apologize, as I said, I signal that what I did was wrong. And in the same way, I signal that I share the same values. So for the victims, it's sometimes important to understand that the values we share are the same. For example, assurance that sexually offensive language is inappropriate in the workplace, and it will not happen again. Another need of the victim is that they understand that what has happened is not their fault. Very simple example is if I go out of my car after hitting someone and I say, this was entirely my fault, I didn't see the red light. So they will have assurance in a certain situations that it was not their fault, okay? Apology can also create the sense of safety for the future, and as we will see in a minute, a promise of the future conduct is can be very important for the victim. But sometimes victims need to see the offender suffer. So the offense was very humiliating, and I need to see the offender who will suffer or at least humiliate themselves by apologizing. This is one of the reasons why sometimes we don't, the victims don't accept the apology immediately. They would like to keep the offender in a while in this situation of a lower position as described in the elevator slide. Okay. So we've come to the elements of effective apology, and different scholars and different, there are lots of articles that suggest what a perfect apology or effective apology needs to contain, but here are some elements that you may find interesting. So the first thing is to acknowledge the offense. Acknowledge the offense means say exactly what has happened and what you have done, okay? Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Many apologies are very vague, and they usually start with, for example, sorry for what I have done. I'm sorry for what I did. Or even worse, I'm sorry for whatever I did, okay? So it's very vague, it's very unspecific. So one of the first elements is to acknowledge what has happened. I'm sorry I spoke, I'm sorry about my remarks, for making remarks about your dress yesterday in a meeting. Another bad example or practice is when you're making the apology conditional, and we very often hear this. If anybody was offended by what I said, or if I offended anybody, I apologize. So this is conditional. This is saying if you feel offended, well, I apologize, but otherwise I wouldn't, okay? A good apology should give an explanation. I have some noise, Laura, but anyhow, maybe somebody is not muted. Give an explanation of what has happened. Now, when giving an explanation, we should be careful not to sound as justification or an excuse. So all the time that we are explaining, it is okay to explain what has happened, but clearly showing that this behavior is inappropriate, okay? Accept responsibility is clearly saying this was my fault, and I will give you a few examples in a minute, okay? Offer of repatriation, offer to repair, offer compensation, whatever it may be. I'm taking you out to dinner tomorrow, or I will pay the damage on your car, is an essential element of an apology. Because if we express regret, acknowledge the offense, we are sorry to what has happened, but fail to offer a proper compensation or repatriation, the victim will question whether we are genuine or not. Okay, learn the lessons means what are we going to do to avoid this happening in the future? If it was an offense at the workplace, or if it was a situation with a car manufacturer where number of cars have displayed failure of brakes or airbags or something else. So we need to, in an apology, address the issue, what we are going to do to prevent this from happening in the future. Essential element of each apology should be asking for forgiveness. So this is not, this is an indication. There are some other elements, but if you would try to phrase a very simple apology, looking at these elements, Laura, I don't see myself on the screen anymore. I hope that you can see, all of you can see myself.
Yes, we can see a small version of you.
Okay, good. Okay, so looking at these elements, I could probably say, I'm very sorry for my remarks about your dress yesterday in the meeting. I wanted to make a joke, but now I see that it was totally inappropriate. It is entirely my fault because I shouldn't have done this in any setting, especially not in the workplace setting. If there is any way I could take my words back, I would, but since I cannot, can I at least offer to buy you a coffee or apologize in front of everybody? I will make sure I never do this again. I now realize how you felt, and I hope that you will be able to forgive me. Something like in a very simple workplace setting, when I said something and somebody took offense. Okay. Aaron Lazar, I mentioned earlier, has a very simple formula. He says, simply accept responsibility and tell the truth. Don't be vague, don't be minimizing, don't use language like, oh, it's nothing. Oh, I make these kind of jokes every day. Nobody would take offense at this kind of a joke. Don't be, one of the typical mistakes is using passive voice. For example, British petrol oil spill in Gulf of Mexico when 11 people died and horrendous damage was created. If you look at their apology, it's all in passive voice. It says lives were lost, damage was created, as if some inexplicable force created the damage, instead of saying our actions were so and so faulty in so and so way, and that caused damage of so and so. I have to hurry up because I'm looking at the to keep some time for good. So these are the elements of that an apology should have. Now, another very important issue and question is how. So this was what needs to go into an apology, but how to deliver an apology can sometimes also be equally important. Just I'm going to mention some of the elements. Whether you're going to apologize personally, that's the best way if you can. Okay, that's the best way. If you're advising somebody, the best way is to apologize personally. But sometimes you have to ask a friend or a relative to apologize for you. Sometimes you apologize through an attorney or a mediator. Let's say you're how do you want to apologize? Do you want to send a letter? Do Do you want to send an email? If you're a public figure, would you publish a letter in the press? Okay. Sometimes, mind you, sometimes it's a part of the request. I want the full and complete apology published in the daily newspaper so that everybody can see what you did to me. Okay. Some celebrities apologize on a TV show. In my paper, you have a few examples. Hugh Grant, Reese Witherspoon, after some incidents, they apologized on TV shows. That's also popular. Would you apologize using social media? Would you apologize on Twitter? Okay, and how would you phrase that? And what will that create? Would you call a media conference? If you call a media conference, who will speak? You had Tiger Woods apologizing in the media conference, apologizing to his wife, who, by the way, was not present there. And the press, there were hundreds of them, journalists, they were not allowed to ask any questions. And about the timing, in one of the handouts, I have, some notes on apology in employment disputes, where an experienced US labor attorney says about the timing, 1 to 3 weeks after the incident shows the victim that the apologizer thought about the incident, but it is not so long to leave the employee waiting for too long. So she's saying 1 to 3 weeks after the incident, but it's just one of the examples. So these are some of the elements that you need to take into account. I have to spend a few more minutes on lawyers and others advising on apology. Why I say lawyers and others? Because there are other people who can advise. Sometimes you ask a friend or a spouse or parent or a teacher or sometimes a priest or a therapist or an attorney or, for that matter, a mediator. Do I apologize? How do I apologize? So again, we have another chart. This depends, how are you going to advise, whether you're an attorney or in some other capacity providing advice. These two elements, what is the level of trust and rapport between the apologizer, potential apologizer, and the advisor? And also, is the advice requested? So let's say you're in a mediation, you're in lawsuit, you're in a mediation case, you're sitting with your attorney in a breakout room, and as an attorney, you see that the apology could probably settle this case. So would you advise or would you not advise? So basically, if you have a good relationship with the apologizer, and the apologizer is asking you for your opinion, you should advise freely. But if you don't have good relationship or close relationship, you've just been appointed yesterday, and they're not asking you, you shouldn't give advice at all. If you have good relationship, but they're not asking you for advice, you can maybe suggest and ask permission. Would you like me to tell you what I think about you apologizing to the other side? If they say no, then keep it to yourself. But if you have low level of trust and they're still asking you, you're my attorney, I'm asking you, what should I do? Should I apologize or not? You can advise, but you should advise cautiously. Okay? So, when advising, there are some risks of apologizing, but also of not apologizing. Now, most notable pragmatic risks of apologizing can be potential acceptance of legal liability. And those in the business of representing clients, defending clients, should think very carefully about the legal liability. up to a certain point in the United States, expression of regret and empathy, let's say in medical malpractice cases, was understood as acceptance of liability. So even when there was no medical error, somebody has died or has been injured, doctors and hospitals were very cautious of saying anything. This was partly dictated by the insurance companies. Okay, I'll give you two examples. For example, California Evidence Code says the portion of statements, writings, or benevolent gestures expressing sympathy or a general sense of benevolence relating to pain, suffering, or death of a person involved in an accident shall be inadmissible as evidence. But statements of fault, however, which is a part of or in addition to any of the above, shall not be inadmissible. So basically, California doctors cannot say it's our fault. Okay? But compare that to the Canadian, British Columbia, they have Apology Act that clearly says an apology made by or on behalf of a person in connection with any matter, and then does not constitute express or implied admission of fault, does not constitute a confirmation of cause of action, does not even, despite of any wording to the contrary, void, impair, or otherwise affect insurance coverage. Most of the insurance policies have a provision which says that you need to, if you are a defendant, you are the offender, you need to assist the insurance company in defending the claim. So some insurance companies feel that any expression of regret, if I was involved in a car accident, automatically will void my insurance policy. So if you're a dispute resolution professional, if you're an attorney, this is something that clearly you need to have in mind. But then I will talk for a minute about the risks of not apologizing. Okay? So there are pragmatic risks that first, the failure to apologize signals to the victim that I'm okay with what I've done. Okay? So if I fail to acknowledge the offense and apologize, the victim may take on a task of teaching me a lesson, basically going after me. There are researches that show that timely, proper, and sincere apology can reduce the claim for compensation by almost 30%. There are examples of hospitals and other institutions that have accepted an open and clear, full apology policy, and in the long run, they've had less cases, less claims for compensation, and eventually paid less damages. But there are also moral risks of not apologizing. Moral, my internal risks. So if I'm aware that I did something wrong, and for whatever reason I choose not to apologize, I feel guilt. That guilt might evolve into a shame, and finally may lead to diminishing my self-esteem. Am I a liar? What did I do? Is this right or wrong? So it may affect actually my identity. So when advising people to apologize, we need to think of pragmatic, moral risks of both apologizing and also not apologizing. Okay, a slide about why lawyers don't apologize more often. They don't think of it. Sometimes they are unaware of safe apologies. So if you're a lawyer, you should explore what the safe apology is. Sometimes it can appear disloyal to the client if you would advise a client to apologize without the client requesting your advice. Client may expect that you are a fierce lawyer, a litigator, that you defend and fight no matter what. Okay. Sometimes it's just the issue of macho lawyering. It's not my style. I'm not going to talk about any apology. Any apology is a sign of weakness. And sometimes it's simply too late. The victim is no longer ready to listen, hear, and accept your apology. So it's too late. And finally, we're going to talk about mediators facilitating apology. And you may find this slide familiar. So we know about the control of the process, which is basically our role, and the control of the outcome, which is the client's role. And the same applies with the apology. And this may also seem familiar. On left-hand side of the chart is settling legal claim, and on the right-hand side is healing the relationship. So I'm sure you've been to cases where you have large dispute in a family that's about the division of property. And sometimes there is no way to reach a settlement on the property, on legal and material issues, unless you have healed the relationship. You have helped them to restore their relationship. But sometimes it's the other way around. The only way to start restoring a relationship is to come to a settlement and resolution of a property claim and a legal claim. So this is all very familiar with what we know as risking grids, that when we control the process, but also the outcome, and we are branded as evaluative or facilitative if we don't mess up with the outcome. But also is similar to the risking grid definitions of broad and narrow approach. In this case, a narrow approach would be settling the legal claim, and broad approach, healing the relationship. So what can be the possible mediator's involvement in the apology? One is the catalyst of conscience. It's easy when we are in the breakout room and one party says, I feel I should apologize. But what if they don't realize that? Is it our role to help them realize how wrong their behavior was and that they should apologize? So whether we should be involved in being a catalyst of conscience, okay? If they decide to apologize and we are in the breakout room, how active are we going to be as mediators in formulating apology? My advice in this little time that we have left, and the way I do it, is I ask them, tell me what you want to say to the other. Have a test run with me in the breakout room. And then I go through all those elements of apology. And then I remember the psychological needs of the victim in receiving the apology. Because as a mediator, of course, my role is to settle the case. And if the apology, if the offense and somebody apologizing is a crucial to reaching a settlement, I have to make sure that when they go to the other room, they don't say, oh, if I offended you, I'm sorry. Or I'm sorry if you feel that way. But I talk to everybody like that. So I see as mediator's role to make sure if they want to apologize that they say the proper thing, not to put words in their mouth, but to follow these rules, okay? So we have low and high involvement. Clarity. We didn't have much time to talk about clarity, but vagueness is one of the opposites of the clarity. So as a general rule, the more specific and clear they are, and in delivering, in formulating the apology, mediators should feel able to be more involved in crafting the apology. If they just say, I want to apologize, I will say something, I would feel very reluctant to work with them on the specifics of the apology. And then finally, we have attribution. Attribution means, as I said before, who is going to apologize? The easiest, of course, role for us is if a party says, okay, I'll go to another room and I will apologize. But sometimes they will ask the mediator, go to the other room, I cannot face them. And please tell them that I'm sorry. Have you had that kind of situation? I had. Please tell them that I'm sorry. So that gives a lot of discretion to a mediator what actually they're going to say in the other room. And the final element and step in this is mediator saying, I think they're sorry in the other room. But they didn't even ask me to say this. So I'm volunteering this information. So I'm very much on the evaluative side. I'm no longer controlling only the process. I'm saying what I feel they think and that they are sorry even though they didn't say that. So these are different fine variations of mediator's role that I think you should all have in mind. So as the final slide, I would say that the mediator's role in facilitating apology is not to convince either party that they need to apologize or not, but to help the parties better articulate the apology that they want to give. Okay. I'm stopping the share and I'm in your hands, Laura.
Super. Thank you very much, Blazo. That was very, very interesting. And so we've had some questions submitted. Would you like me to read them out or will you address them by the Q&A?
Okay. Shall I go from the top? In what context should a mediator have this kind of discourse, encouraging party to behave a certain way without abandoning her neutrality? This is very much with the last. Am I seeing the last questions first, or anyhow?
It's usually the newest one first, unless it's very popular, and then it pops to the top.
Okay. So each mediator should, I think, play it by ear in each particular case. As I said, we should not put words in their mouth, but there are issues where a mediator can act as so-called catalyst of conscience. So try to help one party realize if their behavior was wrong or not. But of course, it is a fine line whether this is crossing the boundary of neutrality or just facilitative and evaluative approach. How to differentiate between explanation and justification? Would every explanation not appear as a justification to the victim? This is a very good question. Let me go back to my example. Yesterday I wanted to tell a joke, and somehow I mentioned your dress, and you took offense. Okay, that would be a very weak explanation. I realize now. Justification would be. This is how yesterday when we joke about this every day, or some other type of justification. It's a fine line, but if you say that when I spoke about your dress, I realized how inappropriate it was, and I realized that I shouldn't have done this. So this is an explanation of what has happened, but I'm not trying to find excuses for what I have done or to justify my actions. Good evening from Bali. If somebody has asked for an apology as a remedy in a dispute, do you have any tip on how to discover intentional motivation between such a request? Again, another very good question. Sometimes apology is part of a request, part of asking. Okay, I want a compensation, I want money for lost earning, and I want my boss, to apologize in front of everybody, or by putting a post in the local newspaper. Okay, then it's a part of a request. And then you as a mediator have to basically treat this as a request, okay? For a mediator, there can be two possible situations. Easier situation and less common is when the offender is offering to apologize and the victim is not asking for an apology, okay? More common and more difficult situation is when the victim is asking for an apology, but the offender does not want to give an apology. Okay, so these are the two types of situation that a mediator can be faced this. Okay, so let's take another one. What is your opinion about the mandatory mediation, mandatory type of mediation is measured for certain types of disputes, for example, labor disputes in Turkey, for commercial disputes in North Macedonia, some other disputes where apology can be strong element of solution and agreement. The issue of any mandatory or automatic mediation is a huge topic, and I don't think we have time to do that. I understand that many countries are introducing some form of mandatory mediation, but whether it's mandatory or not, apology can go a long way in helping to settle the claim. What I skipped and missed to mention is there are many studies that show that no apology is better than partial or insincere apology. So be very careful. If you're a mediator, if you're an advisor, if you're an attorney, if you feel that your client or party in mediation is just going to give a fake apology, it's better not to do anything, because it can only probably enrage the other side. And we didn't have time to go into that many details. If you have a situation with somebody with a personal injury or death, somebody lost a child or spouse or somebody, don't let your clients or parties go into another room and say, we're sorry for your loss, we understand how you're feeling. Because the first thing that the other side will tell you, have you lost a child, or have you lost a father or son? If you have not, under these circumstances, there is no way you can do this. So apology has to be very, very carefully crafted, especially in the high emotion cases. How many mediations were registered in Serbia in 2019? How many mediators were involved? If you have data, how many cases apology was a solution or part of the solution? I'm afraid I don't know if anybody keeps that statistics about apology in mediation. Could you give us an example of an apology that could not be accepted from the other party, so it's necessary to request the party to rephrase, and how we help in this process? Okay, so let's say my example of a bad comment about the dress. I'm sorry if you were offended about what I said. Or I'm sorry you misunderstood my words. I always joke about this, and I'm sorry that if you feel offended. So this is a typical example of a conditional, or I'm sorry that you misunderstood my words, is putting the blame on the victim. You're saying basically, you're not smart enough to understand my words. So these types of apologies. So there is another handout which is called Apology Do or Don't. Okay, and I think you will have access to this handout. And it says, do not be arrogant. Do not blame others. Do not be vague in your apology. Do not deny responsibility. Do not minimize harm. Don't be defensive. Don't qualify the offense. Don't use passive voice, and don't use legal terminology. Use simple words. Say what has happened. the person who will ask for apology, will he be on weaker party? Well, the person who asked for the apology is usually the victim asked for the apology. So whether they are in mediation weaker party or not, that's really questionable. From India, in an externally motivated apology, none of the essential elements of an effective apology are present. If an apology is not motivated internally, what is the point of getting the offenders to apologize? Well, the point here is to understand the motivation, and that you as dispute resolution professionals are able to differentiate whether somebody is apologizing simply for the fear of external punishment, or they have internal motivations for the apology. But our legal systems are not perfect. So, for example, in the US, and I'm sure in many other countries, in the US there are federal sentencing guidelines that give judges discretion to consider whether the offender has apologized or not when determining the sentence. So yes, we can come into a situation where somebody is apologizing simply for the reason to avoid sanction or reduce punishment, but some of the evaluators, assessors, like judges, are obliged to take that into account. Laura.
I'm here.
Okay.
I think you just had one more question popped in at the very last minute there.
Bad apology?
Yes.
If someone gives a bad apology, could we as mediators help the party to rephrase as to communicate the apology to the other party? I think yes. I think yes, especially if they're volunteering the apology. So what I usually do is, whether they are volunteered or the injured party asked for the apology in a breakout room, in a separate room, I rehearse the apology. Okay, I will apologize. Fine, great, I'm glad to hear that. What do you think you should say? And then if they are confused, I ask them specifically, let's do a role play. I'm the injured party. I'm Peter, or I'm Mary, or I'm whoever is in the other room. Tell me, apologize to me. And then I give them some comments. So it really depends on how much rapport you manage to build up as a mediator, how open and forthcoming you have to be. But again, with this caution, we should not put words into people's mouth.
Perfect. And I think that even answers as well the little comment that Sangeeta has just added, saying that, well, so the volunteering element should be present. I think that is very apparent in what you just said. It must be voluntary. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Blazo, for your fantastic seminar. I know that I really enjoyed it, and judging from the comments, other people really enjoyed it as well. For those who attended, there'll be the video as well as all handouts will be available on the IMI website later on today. So thank you again for your great questions. Thank you again to Blazo, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.